Well, good afternoon or good evening for some. The pleasant thing about the webinars is we never know who is connecting from where. So if someone is connecting from the West Coast, it's probably still morning for them. And we know there's quite a few people connecting from Europe this afternoon. So for you, it's early evening. So anyhow, and I just realized, I mean, well, first of all, we're happy that this is our last event before the winter break. But it's also about 6 months, a little more than 6 months that we have been doing webinars. So this is quite an achievement. And yeah, we're happy to take another short break for the festivities. Let me start by the land acknowledgement. So we are at least holding the seminar from Toronto, which is the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Mississauga's territory, and we pay tribute to the land. And me as a guest in this land, and actually a recent arrival in Canada, I very much appreciate the how can I say, the hospitality of the indigenous peoples that lived on this land, and the idea of this land being a dish with one spoon. So where the dish is our Mother Earth and the spoon is the fact that we can all share from the resources of this place. And without further ado, I'd like to start with a very specific theme of this webinar. This is actually our first webinar engaging with something that is more methodological, and it is a critical reflection on research and on what artistic practice can add to research. And it is about the power of digital storytelling, not just as a tool for disseminating our findings, but also as a tool for research as such. And our reflections today come from 2 projects, and we're very happy to have both researchers and filmmakers from these 2 projects. So first, let me present the speakers, and then I'll say a word about the 2 projects. So I'm very happy to have with us 2 filmmakers, Alberto Bougleux, who is joining us from Barcelona, and Cyrus Sundar Singh, who is joining us from near Toronto, or I don't know where you are, Cyrus, at this very moment. Then my colleague Simone Baglioni, who is now in Parma, but when we started this work was in Glasgow, and also my colleague Dominika from Solidarity Now, that is an NGO in Athens. So we're a very transnational team. And the work that we will be presenting is the way we used digital storytelling to engage with research issues, particularly on one hand in a project with the acronym SIRIUS, which is an EU-funded project, so-called Horizon 2020, which involves several European universities, research centers that work on migration, and a couple of non-governmental organizations, of which one is Solidarity Now in Athens. And this project was and still is working. We're in our final year. It was researching the labor market integration of recently arrived migrants, asylum seekers, and refugees in different European countries. And as Alberto Bougleux was our filmmaker partner, and he will say a little bit more in a moment on how we used actually film to tell some of the stories, not just of the migrants, but also of their employers. So we try to engage with a form of virtual dialogue. And then I'm very pleased to introduce a project that some of you at least may know, our project I Am, that Cyrus directs as a filmmaker, which engages 30 graduate students from all over Canada to develop their own 3-minute film documentary answering this question, who I am, and which is a project that has been inspired by immigration, but also by more generally race relations issues of ethnic and cultural and religious diversity, and questions, of course, also of inequality in Canada, and if you want more broadly. So the idea is, as I said, not to engage with artistic forms of inquiry, not just as a way of obviously getting our word out to people who are not in academia and who would not have the time or the interest in reading a newspaper, but they would watch a short film, but also to say what film can contribute to the very research process. So without further ado, I'll give the floor to Alberto to tell us a little bit about his work and then introduce the videos that we will be showcasing in this webinar.
Hello, everybody. I'm really happy to be here with you today, and I think it's really interesting that we can share thoughts and experiences on research and storytelling. Also, it's also great that we can do it in spite of the big distance among us and in spite of all difficulties we are facing nowadays. And well, actually, I would like just to spend really few words about myself, just to introduce a little bit. Actually, I'm a filmmaker. I've been a filmmaker since 2001, mostly committed with social documentary and biographical documentary in a wide range of issues and thematic, and of course, also concerning migration. And in my background, there's also a PhD in sociology, I have to say, that is dated back 2006. And this makes me, it's the reason why I'm quite happy when I'm lucky enough to be commissioned for making a documentary inside or within the context of an interesting and challenging international research project in social sciences, as the SIRIUS project was. Just for coming straight to our theme of today, I think that when we are asking ourselves, when we are wondering how storytelling can aid research, I think that there's something quite big at stake. In fact, you know, storytelling is the whole art of telling a story, which is one really common way human beings have for collecting knowledge about themselves, and also it's the most common way we have for organizing our daily science about how others behave and how we behave, actually. On the other hand, research is the art of, of the critical thought, and we all know that it was originally born for dismantling a knowledge based on stories. So when we are asking how these two aspects can go together, we are in the middle of the ancient mythos logos debate. And we are wondering how can they go together, because they actually do on a daily basis. No? So actually, what I think is that the best way for answering or trying to find an answer to these methodological issues is really watching some stories produced inside the framework of a research project. But just before going straight into it and watching the videos together, I would like just to make a very short story of the production process, really briefly. Everything, of course, starts with the theme. Okay, it was incredibly challenging because the theme at stake is the integration of migrant workers in the job market of the European Union. So you can imagine immediately how big is it, and which amazing variety of possibilities and contexts this can embrace. From northern Scotland down to southern Greece or Italy, or whatever. So in order to address this complexity and to turn it into something close to a narration or to a set of stories, I made two proposals to the research team. One belonging to the process of how to get to the stories, and the other most dealing with the language and the final displays of it. So on the process, I like to see to describe like this. So I try to propose a kind of a game, let's say, to the research team. That is, try to think that the network of the local researchers is indeed a network of local producers. So people in touch with situation, context, circumstances, which may one day be eligible for, and turn into good stories, stories which are worth shooting. And this was what we did. So thanks to Anna, so I was in touch with all the teams and all the researchers, with Dominika and also with Dimitrios. He was not here today, or maybe he is. I have so. And so they were sending several inputs, and this was really, for me, the crucial door for understanding a little bit the local context, and to start a debate for choosing together the best story, and then for organizing and going there on the field and shooting. On the other hand, on the language side, what I tried to propose was a set of short biographical stories for really trying to understand in depth the feelings and the experience of people who's living on their own on their own side, the experience of getting integrated on the European job market. But on the other hand, I also try to propose to displace these stories in a kind of interactive, non-linear context. So that is kind of a web documentary, you may call it. And the idea was the idea for proposing this was trying to setting up a kind of a little simulator of that big complexity behind, the research object, and also leaving the viewer the freedom to combine the parts of and the little stories that we were collecting in their own way, and also to fill in the gaps between them their own way. So just to go quickly, I would like now to just to show you to share with you the general layout of the final output. Okay, so I will quickly share my screen. So, okay, just a moment. I think you can all watch. I hope you can all see it properly. I go through full screen. So this is more or less the final result. And as you can see immediately, when you land here, you find a kind of an interactive environment where you can choose different things to touch or to click on. So let's just go here and explore. And then you find an interactive map with the selection of cities where the different stories were shot. And of course, you can choose one of the cities. And here you will find a set of stories with their own synopsis. For instance, we can just read one. So Mustafa is a refugee from Afghanistan, where he worked as a translator. He escaped from Kabul due to personal threats from the Taliban. He now works as a bike mechanic in Roskilde, and so on. So, and the idea, as Anna was mentioning, was just to really establishing a virtual dialogue. This was also one of the most important part, I think, of the commission. A virtual dialogue between the two points of views: the point of view of the migrant worker and the point of view of the European worker. Okay, and this is what we try to do for each city, and so this is what you can find in each of these cities. So I'll just quickly stop my screen sharing, and what I would like to point out right now is the fact that these stories were selected in a kind of a hybrid way, because for selecting those stories, we had to match two different kinds of criteria. On one hand, there is the dimensions, the relevant dimensions for the research project, and on the other hand, there are there is the narrative balance. That is, this should work as a narration, and we may ask ourselves what is a narration and when a narration is effective. So we may talk about it later, probably. So actually, I don't want to just to go any further, because I think that it's interesting to ask the researchers if this was effective and if this was really helpful or not. So actually, so I'll leave the floor to you, Anna, so you can introduce the local partners who I think also would like to show some of the stories to us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alberto. Yeah, and I think it was great that you shared for a little bit the interactive platform. I think that was really part of the storytelling, to try and like we imagine that this map and people in different parts of Europe, and also this idea of the dialogue between the employer or the local worker and the migrant worker, because it was the idea to see the two sides of the coin, if you want. I want to also make an excuse that probably Simone, you may have noticed in the platform that we had all men and one woman. That was, yeah, a small, how can I say, failure in our endeavor, because we had several women lined up, and in the end, for one reason or another, you know, I'm sure Cyrus understands, you know, the local researchers, the local research teams, and Dominika can talk also about it, were the fixers, what is called the fixers. So they made the connections, and oftentimes they had spent a lot of time building the connection, because it is also something very sensitive, because people will put their story on the line. And you know, sometimes it eventually just doesn't work. But I'll give the floor very briefly to Simone, to Dominika first, to introduce the story of Athens, and then Simone to introduce the story of Parma. Just to say a couple of words, Dominika Spyratou is the programs director at Solidarity Now, which is a very large non-governmental organization based in Athens that works generally in terms of, I think, Solidarity's Now mandate is broader. It doesn't only or necessarily refer to migrants and asylum seekers, and it is about supporting people who are vulnerable and need to be supported to access jobs, education, housing, you know, legal support to access medical services, support with family and kids. But obviously, while it was initially started the first years of the Greek economic crisis, it very soon was overwhelmed and kind of taken over by the refugee crisis in 2015 and 16. And I have been involved with Solidarity Now, and I can say, because I'm sure Dominika will be too modest to say this, this is a great NGO that has done a lot of work, particularly in, and it's not just work of kind of just support or assistance, but also kind of empowerment and self-help and, you know, building capacity, also working with smaller organizations, and particularly, for instance, with regard to the housing and overall integration of recently arrived, you know, asylum seekers and refugees. And Dominika was one of our partners in our project, and she made a great contribution also to the build-up of our Work Keen app, which is an app that that helps migrants and refugees in their search for employment. But we will present this in a different webinar. So Dominika, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna, for the kind words and the invitation, and hello, everyone. I'm going to very briefly present the Greek context as an introduction to the video so that you can understand better the importance of the story. So in 2015, when, as Anna said, an increased number of asylum seekers started arriving to Europe via Greece to seek protection, the country was in the middle of an economic crisis. Golden Dawn, a fascist party, was the third most popular party and a member of the Greek parliament. And people were already blaming migrants for the many negative things that were happening around them and to them. So back then, the reception system in Greece was practically non-existent. And unfortunately, even today, many problems persist due to lack of planning and political will. The idea that if we help them, more of them will come is still dominant for the government. And therefore, we see increasingly more deterrence policies. And at the same time, this is the reason why integration is not part of its agenda. So integration programs and initiatives are very limited and fragmented, and a lot of the work is taken by NGOs who are trying to cover gaps and needs. Again, as Anna said, many organizations, including us, are providing services such as legal aid, psychosocial support, Greek language courses, and employability courses, to name just a few. And this is what we do, Solidarity Now does in its Solidarity Centers. And the person you will soon see in the video is one of the people who are beneficiaries, who has used our employability services and has managed to open his own shop. By creating empathy for Manasif, the protagonist in the video, viewers can associate with the hardships migrants face when they come to Greece. But at the same time, the video shows a success story. And even though many migrants, refugees, or asylum seekers are not as lucky as Manasif, viewers can see that people have potential if they're given the right opportunities and tools, and they can also offer back to the host society. So basically, it's a counter narrative to the dominant anti-migration narrative that many governments promote these days, and also shows why integration is so important. So when I watched the video, my first thought was, I want to visit his shop, and I'm sure you'll feel the same. And as the video speaks for itself, I will stop here. I hope you enjoy it, and we can continue the discussion later.
My name is Manasaf Raza. I'm from Pakistan, 23 years old, and I had done my study before in commerce subject business line. And now I'm here in Athens. I'm still doing my study in about hairdressing, but I can do a job, so I just start working here. My mother, she always wanted me to become a lawyer, but I was never interested in this thing. On that time, I wanted to do it fashion designing, but just because of some family reasons, so they say no. In the culture where I belong, so it's a Pakistani culture, it's a Muslim culture. We are not allowed that much. We are not free in our country, and I always try to run away from there. When I came in Athens, I asked many people if they can give me any job, but no one was interested and no one can trust me to give me a job because I don't know Greek language, I don't have any skill. And then after I make like promise with myself that first I must have to learn any skill, and then I can do what I want. This salon and this program is started by Orange House. They wanted to start this project for a refugee, for immigrant people, that they can start their life like this. I'm so lucky that they find my CV and my resume about that I'm an immigrant here, and I'm running every day to learn about hairdressing. And then they call me and they say, okay, of course we can start. Super. In salon, I have all clients, Greek, sometimes refugees, sometimes other countries, volunteers, they come here. People, they are coming here, they wanted to know how an immigrant person is here and how he's running for his life. And sometimes I feel really shy to tell about my stories and all the things. Many reasons that always making me to run away from that country, from that culture, from that all the things. Maybe I cannot share with you the reason why I'm running from them, but just I don't want to face them anymore. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Dominika. And yeah, it was great to see Manasaf's story. Without further ado, I'll give the floor to Simone to introduce our cases from Parma. Simone is the scientific director, actually, of the SIRIUS project, as I said, this multi-university Horizon 2020 project.
Thank you, Anna, and good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, the next stories are have been actually shot here in Parma, where I am now, although as Anna was saying, I've been working on this project when I was an immigrant myself in Glasgow, where I have been an immigrant for many years. The story we are going to show and we are going to listen to together is, and we're going this time to look at both, let's say, stories, the immigrant story and their employers, which are people from Parma story, with the idea that Anna mentioned before that we had in mind when we have conceptualized this documentary with Alberto, to try to provide a dialogue version of the relationship between migrants and European citizens. As you will see, it's a proper dialogue in which there is nothing hidden, in which there are concerns expressed by the locals, in which there are hope also, and concerns as well, on little concerns on the side of the immigrants themselves. Just a couple of words on why this story in Parma and why you're going to see this is filmed in their workplace, obviously, which is a farm producing Parmesan cheese. because Dominika referred before to the debate that we have in Europe around migration, which is polarized around issues of, let's say, belonging, or issues of diversity, emphasizing diversity, not always in a constructive manner, but there's very little attention paid to the role that migrants play to keep our societies and our economies alive. So we wanted to show the importance that migrant work represents for a key sector, in this case of the Italian economy. I'm sure you are all familiar with the Parmesan cheese, a world famous brand, is produced here in Parma by farms which are now largely employing or even driven by migrant workers. But the debate about this, or the visibility of this precious and important work, is very limited. And this is one of the reasons which I think led Alberto to travel to here and to film our stories that you're going to see. So really, I hope you enjoy them, and I'm happy to discuss them with you all after.
Mi chiamo Ture Salifu, vengo della Costa d'Avorio e sono arrivato qui in Italia il 1° marzo 93 e sono venuto qui per cercare una vita migliore lì. Allora, quando sono arrivato qui, sono da Roma, sono venuto a Fiumicino. Da Fiumicino sono andato a Varese perché lì era mio fratello lì. Quando sono arrivato ho trovato un po' di difficoltà perché ho lasciato i genitori, ho lasciato tutto lì. A questo momento senza documenti non potevo lavorare, non capivo bene la lingua lì, allora avevo tanti problemi lì. Vedi? E le gente lì non sono tutti che sono aperti lì ai stranieri lì così. E lì sono venuto, ho fatto il corso per addetto di stalla lì, 6 mesi, perché lì io facevo anche l'allevamento lì, delle galline lì, allora volevo approfondire, volevo venire qui in Europa per imparare ancora. Allora, quando ho finito, ho avuto questa azienda lì, sono l'addetto di stalla mongoleva, che l'importante per me era l'orario di lavoro lì, perché mi alzavo presto mattina e anche mattina vengo a lavorare, la sera torno ancora di nuovo. Vedi? E non sono abituato a questo ritmo lì di lavoro prima. Adesso vivo 2 chilometri di qua, vicino qui. C'è una piccola lì di 8 anni che va a scuola. Allora ogni mattina quando finisco di lavorare alle 8 l'accompagno a scuola lì. E ora mi sento più italiano che ivoriano.
Mi chiamo Singh, sono indiano e lavoro, sono 11 anni qua, sempre il lavoro di stalla. Nel 2007 io sono venuto in Italia, 3 anni senza documenti, è stato nel 2010 preso il permesso. Quando sono venuto in Italia io ho andato a casa di mio zio, fratello di mia mamma. E ho girato da tutte parti, Mosca, Ucraina, Cecoslovacchia, dopo Austria. E 2 mesi per venuto in Italia. Anche adesso io ho fatto domanda per mia mamma venire qua. Adesso vita qua.
So this was the story of Touré and Singh, but I think we have also the story of the Araldi brothers, who are their employers. Is that right, Simone?
Yeah, it is right. Yeah, we can also see the story just to see the dialogue among them. Yeah.
Io sono Araldi Luigi, faccio parte di questa azienda composta da io, mio fratello, 2 nipoti, siamo i titolari dell'azienda. Siamo qua dal 1963 a Madregolo, però da sempre i nostri antenati, nonni, bisnonni, papà facevano l'agricoltura, gli agricoltori lavoravano il terreno con le vacche e così. Le nostre attività sono vacche da latte, e produciamo latte per il Parmigiano Reggiano e abbiamo anche il caseificio dove facciamo il formaggio con il latte della nostra azienda. Prima avevamo una piccola stalla, poi pian piano ci siamo evoluti, attrezzandoci anche con le innovazioni. Abbiamo un paio di operai, momentaneamente ce ne abbiamo 3, di cui uno viene dalla Costa d'Avorio, 2 indiani che fanno la mungitura.
La nostra azienda è nata con noi 2 e l'aiuto familiare, e poi col tempo, crescendo, ci siamo adottati di personale, però personale diciamo italiano, nostrano, non si trova più.
Anni fa c'era, 20 anni fa, 25.
E poi è sparito, e dopo ci siamo adeguati con gli extracomunitari, fra i cui uno è della Costa d'Avorio, che è 20 anni, gli ho insegnato io, però non è che apprendano al massimo, insomma. Non si adeguano molto anche col parlare, loro parlano fra loro, parlano sempre la sua lingua, e noi per capirli ci vuole un interprete, insomma, bisogna sempre domandarlo 10 volte, loro dicono sì, non si sa se hanno capito, se non hanno capito. Dopo poi
anche perché non c'è una scuola di preparazione per queste persone, o loro non ci vogliono andare, forse qualcosa c'è, ma
però oggi diciamo grazie a Dio che ci sono loro, perché dei nostri non si trova più nessuno che venga a fare questo mestiere, perché c'è da alzarsi alle 3:30, alle 4, c'è da, vabbè, dopo c'hanno magari la giornata libera, però la mattina è la mattina, insomma.
Lavorare non vuol dire girare con un telefonino, mentre i dati. Sarà un lavoro sicuramente. Il lavoro è un'altra cosa, cioè c'è lavorare la domenica pomeriggio, il giorno di Natale, il giorno di Pasqua. Le festività che uno ha, qualsiasi religione ha, il lavoro c'è da lavorare.
Yeah, and we all felt actually in the last comment, which was about the work and what kind of activities work. We had debated a lot with Alberto whether we should include it or not, because it wasn't about migration in general, but it was, I think it was really interesting about what does work mean today. He said, yeah, these people who go around with their phone. Simone, I'll get back to you when we start the discussion. Right now, I'd like to turn a little bit to Cyrus and ask, so we have seen these 2 examples from the SIRIUS project and how we use these narratives actually to illuminate a little bit what a lot of, long text and policy analysis can say, but filmmaking shows it from another way. So I'd like to ask you, Cyrus, and I have to say that Cyrus, beyond being a very experienced and award-winning filmmaker, has also decided to put himself to, back to school, as we say in Canada, and he's currently finishing a PhD in FCAD, which is the Faculty of Communication and Design at Ryerson. So I'd like to ask you, how do you approach a research topic from an artistic perspective?
Well, the greatest thing about stories is that we carry those away with us, right? And that's the communication that we take away. And all of us have a story to tell, you know, whether it's great, not so great, it's troubled, it's happy, it's sad. There's a story, and part of what we as humans are conditioned to do is to speak and to communicate and to tell stories. The amazing thing is that when we provide a space for someone to tell us their story, so provide not only the space, but the comfort of the space, and allow them to tell us their story, they will tell us the story, and they will be great storytellers. And they will tell it without trying to edit it, right? They will tell it in their own voice. And that is part of the beauty of what a story can do, because a story can travel. It can travel from town to town. It can travel across the world. You don't need the internet. We never had the internet. We've had stories, you know, for you know, thousands of years. And now with the internet, we also have stories, and they can travel much faster. But the idea is that when we're allowed that space and we create that space to tell that story, we tend to tell those stories. So as a creative person, or as a director, or as a researcher even, if I enter a space, and that space could be anything, it could be a virtual space or a physical space or just a space of relationship, and I allow for that comfort, and I open up that comfort, and I know that that person feels that comfort, that is, you're going to get more out of that than having to kind of write about it or having them write about it. So that's kind of where I start my research, is to kind of open up that space. And that is what I found has worked for me, is to just open it up. Are you guys there? Did you?
Yeah, no,
okay.
I was just sure. Are you finished or?
I am. So depending on how much time there is, I like to actually show you an example of that, if that's okay. All right. So I'm just going to set this up really quickly. So today is December 10th. Okay. 5 years ago, on December 10th, the first 150 set of 150 Syrian refugees arrived in Canada, in Toronto. As a matter of fact, that's where I am right now. So that story came to us only because of a very tragic photograph that we all remember about Alan Kurdi, it was a boy that was found dead on the beach. And that happened in September. So now we're in December of that same year, 155 Syrian refugees arrived, who today, 5 years later, some of them are actually going to have their citizenship ceremonies here in Canada. So it's a pretty, you know, phenomenal date and time. 30 years earlier, on the coast of Newfoundland in 1986, 155 Tamil Sri Lankan refugees sought refuge in 2 lifeboats. They had come across the Atlantic in a cargo ship, were dumped in 2 lifeboats, and they spent 3 days in the Atlantic waters. And they were finally rescued by a fisherman, Gus Dalton of Newfoundland on the South Shore. And all of them were saved. So how do you tell that story? Okay, so we're going to do something right here. And I've asked my colleagues to pitch in. So this is called, and I will end my piece here after the read, and it's called In the Belly of the Cargo Ship. Are we ready? Simone? Okay, you're on.
I am. In the belly of the cargo ship, we held our breath, our noses. Sorry, I was reading on another. I need to start. I was reading on another.
Go ahead. No, read your script. Read your script.
In the belly of the cargo ship, we held our breath, our noses, and each other in the belly of the cargo ship.
Albert?
A village born of need and circumstance. No earth, no roots where we used to stand. floating to the lure of the promised land, Montreal, in 3 to 4 days in the belly of the cargo ship.
In the belly of the cargo ship, we held our breath, our noses, and each other in the belly of the cargo ship.
A promise. We'd reach Canada in 3 or 4 days. For 12, we sat in fear, huddled together, all strangers. On the 12th day, or 13th, or 14th, we lost count. We were set adrift in 2 lifeboats on the open sea. Strangers united in hope, 155 or 156 strangers.
Simone?
The promise we'd reach Montreal in few hours. For 2 days or 3. We drifted in our lifeboats with no food or water. We were lost, cold and hungry. No land, no help, no hope.
Anna, could you please?
In the belly of the cargo ship we held our breath, our noses, and each other in the belly of the cargo ship.
We constantly invoked the names of our gods and hoped that our faith would carry us to shore. No land, no help, no hope in the belly of the cargo ship. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you too, Cyrus. So this is we said the story, right?
This is it. So how do you take something that is so big, so monumental, so distant from what I am or where I am, and how do you contain it within something that you can walk away? So in fact, that poem was written, pulled from transcripts of real interviews of people who were on that boat, right? Who wanted to remain anonymous because there's still a shame that is associated with arriving in a boat somewhere as opposed to arriving on a plane somewhere. So they still carry that even after 30 years. So I had to find a way of trying to bring that out, but in a very, trying to frame it. So I decided to frame it in a poem. So it actually ends up as an epigraph in a chapter that's coming out in a book called Finding Refuge, Narratives of Dislocation, that's going to be coming out next year in Canada. And so it helps to kind of frame whatever is going to be reflected out of that. And that's how I was able to kind of articulate that large story into something that we can walk away with.
Yes, and I think this is thank you very much, Cyrus. I think also for the performative part of it. And I think this is a very way to transition to my next question to Simone, which is actually supported from a question from the chat by our colleague Mehru Ali. So my question is, what is the value of an artistic approach for research? And Mehru adds, how can we respond to students who might worry that stories are not about truth, and how can they be important for policy making? So how can they be important? And it is true, for instance, the work that we did in the SIRIUS project was and is, I mean, actually we have still a few months to go and some more work to do, we did aim to provide some key messages to policymakers.
Okay, very quickly, as I'd like to hear more, obviously, of you replying to this $1 million question, perhaps, concerning why this word, for example, from a policymaking perspective, I would say we're providing evidence to understand a problem, a social issue or a phenomenon. This is, as researcher, I think we should provide to policymakers. So evidence-based understanding or better understanding of something we are interested in. In our case, it was in particular what were the barriers and are the barriers and enablers, to use our academic jargon, what it works, what doesn't work, to speak maybe more simply, in migration, let's say in facilitating migrants entering the labor market in the sense having decent job with good salaries and allowing them to live a decent life. With these stories, I think we provide that kind of contribution to gathering evidence around what works, what doesn't works. If you listen to this, the dialogue actually on the Araldi and Ture and Singh, you have the impression, I think I have the impression, that some of the concerns are really, how can I say, really secondary. They don't, they don't prevent people from staying together, from contributing, in that case, to the flourishing of a company, and really providing the evidence that there's a mutual need of each other to, on the one hand, to make a business work and to make a good life and good living, regardless where you come and how you come. If you find this matching land and this matching, let's say, site, which in this case is the farm. So I would say this is the answer, one of the answers that comes up to my mind. As a researcher, I think it's very important to use different, like this one, digital storytelling on the one hand, because maybe if it was not a full co-production in the true sense of the word, but it was a process in which the people you have seen, their faces, they're speaking with their voices, have been involved, have interacted in a proper dialogue with Alberto, have agreed and to be part of this project through this movie, have given their consent to have their story traveling. As I really like what Cyrus said about the powerful, dimension of a digital story that travels across culture, languages, and so on, and therefore, really at a global scale, the message can be deployed. So I think that is important, having people being part of your work as a researcher and providing voice and providing, therefore, a platform where this type of issues are spoken by those involved. With the frame that we know and with the filter that we are all aware, but still, they have been part of this process of production of knowledge. The other point, and then I'll really stop, I wanted to make is for me as a researcher to understand. I was mentioning before, we were looking to enablers, barriers, what are the problems, what works and doesn't work. I think looking at the face of someone, at the body and face language, and listening to the words of these people, what is working, what hasn't working. The Araldi says that, and Tura on the other side says that, is really another way through learning what doesn't work, what works, what it does, by looking at their emotions that comes out and transpire through their faces, through their body language. And very important, and really, I really thank Alberto for that, because he has this, well, filmmaker, but particular filmmaker, if I can say, Alberto, to capture the context, because the context is also very powerful when you try to understand. In this case, we're speaking about labor migration. The context is very important in the sense for you as a researcher, for me as a researcher, to understand the situation. What are we speaking about? Manaf's case as well, in his shop. It gives you the image of this, self, how can I say, standing capacity to find a place in the society through work, owning a shop and being part, and a key part in that shop, and showing the context where that happens, with the social relationship and so on, with the commercial side. So I think this is another aspect which I really found very useful in using digital storytelling. And I'll stop here. I suppose you all have other thinking and ideas to share.
Yeah, thank you, Simone. I think it's very interesting what you say, and I think I hope it came through during these videos, and also through what we discussed with Cyrus and the poem we did, is this idea that you can have very complex policy analysis that just somehow come together in the film. So everyone who knows, for instance, the refugee reality in Athens in the last 5 years, or everyone who knows the more long-term, I would say, labor migration story in central and northern Italy, and in relation particularly to agriculture or to, you know, to the dairy industry, can really see all the pieces of the policy coming together. And if you want, we can also see the shortcomings of it. The fact that, I mean, we didn't want to hide this, you know, the feelings of alienation that the employers expressed, their wish that they had Italians. After 25 years where Touré has been there, they still express the sense of alienation. And it is true that Touré speaks fluently, but incorrectly. And it is interesting that one of the Araldi brothers points to the fact that probably there's no, or I think nowadays there's plenty of courses in Italy actually usually administered through the schools. So in the evening hours in, you know, normal public schools, but probably when Touré came, there was no such possibility. And then he started speaking, he was speaking incorrectly, but then he never had the luxury to, you know, to go back to school, so to speak. But I have two questions from the chat that I think are very important, on which I'd like to ask Dominika and Alberto to give their views, because Dominika had, together with our other colleague Dimitrios, they had to ask us to act as the go-between. So the questions are of how does exactly the dialogue between the research and you know, the filmmaking has worked. What role had the migrants more actively in the filmmaking, and also the ethical questions or the questions about privacy and how we negotiated those. So maybe Dominika goes first. As
Yeah, well, I wasn't present as my colleague Dimitris was there when this whole process was taking place. So I think Alberto is the best person to answer this question. But I just wanted to say something about the previous question, the true value for policymaking, for influencing, I guess, policymaking, because I do advocacy and we always talk about strategies and how we should be influencing people and so on. Like, obviously you need a different story for different audiences, but always you need to support the story with data. So this is our job, to bring the data and combine it with the right story. It should never be too emotional, or we should never exaggerate, because yes, then we don't convince. But if you have those two together, I think you can influence things. And of course, this is not a situation where you do something and then it ends. It's a continuous work. I think Alberto is better to answer the other questions, as I have experience with interacting with people for research purposes, but not for the video. So I may give the wrong information, if that's okay with you, Alberto.
Yes, thank you, Dominika. And actually, I think what you raised is very important, also the power of digital storytelling for civil society actors to share their message. Alberto.
Yes, well, actually, I'd like to say that when you start a documentary making process, you need to know that there's always something that is not completely predictable, because we are dealing with reality and free behavior of people. Okay, and so you start with a kind of a narrative program in mind, and the narrative program is a probabilistic program, okay, concerning roles and meaning. Okay, and then you're looking for circumstances where these can be tested, confirmed, or reverted. Okay, and this is, I think, is the matching point between the research in filmmaking and the research, because it's there where we can share objects. Okay, which is not objects, of course, is person, is life experience, is a symbolic landscape, is a whole bulk of meanings. Okay, and then we can start looking for the right person, which is more or less probabilistically interacting with this narrative plan that we have. But then reality shows up and all your plans can be completely erased from one day to the other. So if Dominika remembers, actually we started with completely different stories from Manasif. But all of a sudden, just 3 days before my flight to Athens, those stories simply disappeared. Okay, and so we had to reframe completely our work. But why could we did it? Of course, thank you, and thanks again, Dominika, for doing it and with Dimitrios, and so quickly and so well. But it was possible because we had a clear plan in mind, so we knew what we needed. Okay, and but of course, that was all. So at that point, I had just one chance to go to massive shot and to shoot something meaningful, and everything worked quite well. But of course, I think that this is also raising the question about what is a good story, and this was what I was trying to say just at the beginning. So I think that when we are dealing with stories, we are dealing with two kind of different things. On one hand, we are dealing with real people, that is, living entities going around and doing their own life. Okay, but on the other hand, we are dealing with what sociologists may call roles. Okay, and roles. What is a role? A role is the cluster of information we collected during our experience, during our history, concerning how people probably will behave in a certain context, and also about how we will react to certain things, etc. Probably it's not just only related to people; it's general. Okay, so when we are dealing with roles, when we are dealing with these two aspects, overall in documentary making, we are also dealing with the distance between these two aspects. Because roles belong to culture, belong to discourse, belong to the speaking, belong to meaning and symbols and signs. But people are there and with their body, and what they need to do for make themselves and their behavior comprehensible to others is somehow performing a certain role. Maybe they do not want, maybe they will fail in doing it. Okay, but we don't have any other way to show to others who we are and what we are doing. And so there's always a distance between the person and the role. Okay, and every time we meet somebody, what we are watching is the struggle, or they are watching our struggle, my present struggle right now while I'm talking to you, just to perform a meaningful role and to perform it coherently to what is expected from that role, or subverting it willingly or unwillingly. Okay. So I think that every time we have this kind of experience of seeing the people walking, not from the little hole, from the cave, up to this, up to the society, okay, up to for showing their own role. Actually, we are seeing what is happening to the role itself. So we are actually each of us is able to rewrite in every single moment the role we are displaying. Okay, and see, I think that when this distance is quite strong, there's something meaningful happening, because we are forced to rewrite the role that is the lens through which we are watching that single life experience. Manasif is a very good example. Another very good example is the story of Said, that Iraqi refugee I met in Prague, who now got a really good position at Amazon. And so you see immediately, if I see an Iraqi refugee getting a good position at Amazon Prague, so there's a distance between these life experiences, and the way he worked through this distance is reframing the way we understand the experience of being a migrant, and also the way we may understand of being an Amazon employee. And I think that when this happens, the story is interesting, because it's helping us in understanding something about our general knowledge about that aspect of the of our social life. And this is also related to privacy. Sorry, is it too long?
No, I mean, actually, I wanted, okay, yeah, I mean, we can go a little bit over time, but I wanted to ask you to reflect also on the ethical aspect of how you deal with the privacy issue. And we have one more question from the chat that I think I will address, then I will ask Cyrus also to react to it, which is, well, one, if you're doing the filmmaking and if the subjects, particularly if they are migrants, are unhappy with the film, so this kind of signing off. And the question that Alka Kumar is asking about, I think it's a very important question about the role of the audience. And as you were speaking about the role, you know, what you were saying, Alberto, about the individual and the role, it just makes me realize the way, because we've done actually 3 films with 3 different projects with Alberto in the last 10 years, and how I was interpreting some of the films, some of the migrant subjects, because every time they were migrants, how I was interpreting their story had to do with this role that I had in mind, whether in one way or another. Anyhow, so if you can briefly address the ethics issue or the privacy issue, and then I'll give the floor also to Cyrus about how do we deal with the audience and the way in which there can be 2 different stories told, or many different stories from one film.
Sure. Well, briefly on privacy, actually, I think that everything is really related to the fact that when we are dealing with true stories belonging to reality, we are dealing both with the real person, the living entity, and her meaning for us and for him herself. Actually, when we are asking people to join our video project or cinema project or whatever, or storytelling, we are asking permission to use her meaning in our context, the meaning we see in his or her story, and also the meaning he or she is able to display to us. So we're asking kind of a really sensitive issue, okay? Because on the other hand, there is the living person, okay? So, and we can't just grab the meaning and make the meaning we see and use it as we like. And this is the reason why we need to ask permission, because we are asking to living entities to use the meaning they have for us. And so it's really crucial what Cyrus was pointing out, was highlighting before. So you need to establish a fair and comfortable and transparent environment where you're able to make room to the story to be displayed, because everybody knows what it is going to be used for. And of course, you need also to be ready for a refusal, and for, you know, just people who may like to quit. But here you need to be able to play a little bit, not for cheating, because if you cheat, you never achieve anything good. But it's true that so often people also see your own role as filmmaker through their own lens. So maybe they might be more scared of the camera than needed. So if you simply follow the, you know, the worrying about being on videos, you maybe just get to the point that you can't do the job. Instead, if you are able to establish that comfortable environment, and just to clarify the aims of your job, then everything can work, because people just can accept that we are going to share the meaning they have for us in another context, and of course we are going to sign something, so there's an agreement, and from that point on, everything will work fine, in my opinion. But everything is lays on being able to establish that initial trust.
Thank you very much, Alberto. Yeah, that is very, very, very helpful and very interesting. And Cyrus, on I think both, again, this question that I think I'm sure you have faced as well, and also the question of how can meaning be lost or found.
Okay, thank you, Anna, and thank you, Alberto. I think you kind of laid a really great foundation, and you've also shown that in your films, so where you kind of created that space. So there is a relationship that starts when you start that first conversation with someone who you think is going to tell you a story, and they think that you're going to capture their story. So I want to kind of define a couple of things. So one is that I don't necessarily think of myself as the storyteller or the director in those situations. I'm kind of a curator, right? So I'm searching for and I'm bringing together a bunch of people or a circumstance where someone wants to tell their story. So I'm not necessarily the storyteller, but I am framing that story in a creative way. So I'm bringing my whatever I can bring to it. In fact, the fact that Alberto was in that space to be able to get Mansip's story, right? So that's his role, that he was there to do that. And Mansif was ready to tell you that story. So those are the two things that kind of come together. And these are not neat little packages that happen. These are sometimes just happenstance, right? You happen to be somewhere, somebody knows somebody's brother, and two degrees removed, and everything comes together. And you just got to be able to roll. Now, the contract is that in my work, is that my work is always for an audience, whether it's a written piece of work that is entirely academic, or if it's a creative piece of work, or any kind of a combination. Because for me, the stories need to reach the community, right? Without the audience, right, there is no story. So I go back to this little linear thing where I say, every story has two basic components, in my opinion and in my experience, and that is the teller and the listener, right? So you have to have a listener who's going to listen to the story for the story to be created. So the two are actually complicit in creating what we call story. So you can, if you go and tell something, in the forest, if the trees are falling and nobody's there to listen to it, are they really falling, and doesn't anybody care? I don't know. It doesn't matter. But it has to be listened to for it to then be carried as a story somewhere else. So there is that first kind of relationship and a little bit of a contract that happens. And so the audience, right, is brought into it because they're also there to witness that story, right? So in my work, practically, I always put it up front that this is for an audience. So if that person who wants to tell the story is not comfortable, right, either being the person to tell the story to an audience, or wants to cover their face or remain anonymous, that's entirely their prerogative, and I will help where I can. In fact, the poem that we had collectively read, and thank you very much, was from a story from someone who wanted to remain anonymous. Okay, so I said, great, so you can remain anonymous, but you've given me this story, so you've entrusted this story to me as a curator. And so now it behooves me, so I have a responsibility to now carry this forward. But how can I carry it forward? And so I have to find a frame, right? Which is where we are. We are as filmmakers or creators or whatever, poets, dancers, musicians. We frame something, and then we then take that to the audience, right? Now, it doesn't mean that everything that the storyteller wanted to say is completely what I'm translating to the audience, right? I am intervening, and yes, I bring whatever my biases are, creative, otherwise, in terms of translating that to somebody else. I'm a translator, but that's okay, because the audience also will bring their own biases and their own expertise and their own energies to it, and they will actually help with you to color in whatever it is that it is. So there is a contract between all of us to create what this thing is called a story. So as long as the person who wants to tell the story is completely aware where this is headed, which is something that I always put up front, if they want to walk away, they're free to walk away. But at the end of the day, if they don't want it to be shown or heard or be attached to it, that is something that you have to work out prior, okay? Because too much investment would have gone in by that time to be able to back out. So I always give them the option at the beginning, and then we move forward. And then if there's something that we need to work out, we can always work things out. But there's no, I certainly draw a line between the editorial and what has been given to me and my editorial line, because I need to do that, because I am present. I'm not absent. The camera is present. It's not absent. The recording device is present. It's not absent. So it does change the condition. Okay, I hope that answers the question, but so far I have not had any of those issues in any documenting anybody's stories.
Thank you very much. No, I think that this answers the questions, and of course, there's we can never overestimate the importance of building a trust relationship beyond, as you both pointed out, signing, a piece of paper that says you you allow for the filming what's called the release form, and the building a relationship of trust, and of course then that each one of us has a part to play. I think this is not, I mean, I think this is the end of our webinar, but not the end of our discussion, as not only we will do other webinars from January on other research issues, but we will certainly have a webinar and a web launch of the IM project and the own stories made by these graduate students who are not actually film, you know, who are not people who study film studies. They come from all different disciplines. Our main criterion has been their passion to explore this question of IM, of who they are. And with this, I wanted to thank again all our speakers, Simone, Alberto, Dominika, Cyrus, Claire, as always, for being our host. And thank you all for your time, and look forward to, you know, seeing you again on Zoom and maybe at some point in person. Have a nice afternoon or evening.